we hack the code and flip the tag. Where cliches come to retire. Drop that beat, turn down to fire. Say what's real, make fears take a seat. Unconventional wisdom, dancing on your feet. Hey.
Hello and welcome to Unconventional Wisdom, about conventional wisdom. I am your host, Kim Miller-Hershon. I am so pleased to be with my guest today, Angelo D'Amico. Let me tell you a little bit about Angelo, and then we're going to just jump right in here. He's a Canadian CEO. He leads a multi-million-dollar manufacturing company, and he spends a lot of time thinking about how leaders navigate ambition, pressure, values in real business, which, by the way, I love. He has a background in economics and philosophy. Angelo brings together executive experience and deep reflection on decision making, leadership, and what success actually costs behind the scenes. He doesn't promise easy answers. Instead, he invites honest conversations about how to build a meaningful career without losing yourself along the way. So, as you can tell, Angelo is the perfect guest for this podcast, and I know we're going to have a great conversation. So, before I ask you random questions, is there anything else that you want to add to that intro?
No. Hi, Kim. I'm happy to be here with you. I think you covered it pretty well.
Excellent. All right. We are dying to know, what are you a closet fan of?
Okay, a closet fan. I'll give you two. I'll give you a fun one and a less fun one. I don't want to sell you short by giving you a safe answer. I'm a closet fan of 90s rap music because I grew up in that era. All right. And then the safer one that I would tell people maybe traditionally would be, and it's still true, long form philosophy podcasts. I like to watch them several hours long, that sort of thing. I definitely don't belong sometimes in that arena of thinking, but it's nice to witness it anyway.
Okay, you know what is very funny? I was a teacher's, I want to say back in the day, and I had a kid in one of my classes, apropos of 90s like rap style, and he had these pants that were probably 5 sizes too big for him, right? Like down on his hips, right? With his boxers showing. And here is the funniest thing. So he was a student, but he lived in the neighborhood, and I happened to be driving by one day, and he was taking out the trash, and as he has his hands on the trash bin, I see his pants just fall to his ankles. It was honestly very funny.
Fashion comes with risks.
And there you go. There you go. How funny. All right. Let's get into our conversation about leadership and your journey. So, what's one piece of conventional business wisdom that you followed early on, only to realize later that it was completely wrong for you?
Yeah. I think that in my early career, I think I'm about 16, 17 years now since I've been either consulting or even now in my operational leadership role. I think that in the beginning, I thought that a lot of problems that especially smaller size companies had were something that they could outgrow. So
Hmm.
if they had issues with their culture, with their people, with their processes, even their strategy or financial pressures, that the answer to that was if they could scale. And in my own way, if I could scale, that some of those things would not be as maybe larger companies aren't going to have that concern. They're not going to have that same financial problem because they're going to be big enough to not worry about that anymore. Some of these problems are just not going to be, they're going to subside with the scale. And as you can imagine, young, naive me, I'll let myself have that mistake and it's all part of the learning. But nowadays, I definitely don't see it that way. I think that your problems scale with you and you really do have to address these things. The consequences get bigger. So when you scale up, there's more people involved sometimes. And so your consequences of your decisions affect more people. If there could be more dollars at stake in your decision making and there could be more oversight with stakeholders and things like that at a different kind of scale.
Right.
So you can't just outgrow your problems. You really have to address them. So I think that's one for me.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also too, one of the mistakes that I often see in my coaching practice is people making the assumption that scale means making more money, right? Like I
Right.
just get bigger and then I'm going to either charge more or have more business. And so therefore, I'm going to have more profit,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And we know that is, it could be true, but
Mhm.
it is not necessarily true.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's all built based on the kind of the soundness of the model it's all founded upon, among other things. But from a technical perspective, if you have something that's just not that profitable and you scale it up, you get to work a lot harder for that no profit that you have. So there's really systematic things you need to address, but none so important as the people, I think, as the foundation of all of it.
Right.
If you don't have buy-in for people in all, my company is about 60 people, give or take, at any given moment. So we've got a sales team, we've got people doing quoting, we've got people doing customer service and shipping and making things, right? All across, we've got all different kinds of departments. And if they don't believe in it, you'd be amazed that there's thousands of little ways that things get done less well, less urgently, less customer centrically, less
Right.
communicatively, less collaboratively. And those things stack up to what you guess on a technical way you call profit leakage. But from like a personal way, just it's less fun and people don't believe in it. You don't get the same thing in the end.
Right. Oh gosh, there's so many things. There's so many ideas that brings up. I think one of the mistakes that I see very often from leaders around what you're talking about is we're so clear about what our culture and values are, and they're on the wall, right? Like people can see them. And even people who talk about them, right? I think sometimes there's two things that can happen. One is that the leaders don't walk the walk, right? There's nothing worse than having a stated value or culture that the leaders don't adhere to, right? Because
Yeah.
then everybody's, this is not just we don't have to do it, but it's, it just leaves a really bad taste in your mouth, right? I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah. The culture is the truth about the situation. The thing on the wall is the claim, but the claim and the
that's
truth
right.
might not be the same thing. Yeah.
That's right. Actually, it was one of my podcast guests said it, I think, the most eloquently I've ever heard it, which is the culture is what happens when nobody else is in the room. The
Sure.
truth, right?
Sure. Yeah, I could see that perspective. And I think that on one hand, I think what you're articulating, maybe we get into this even more later, is are the values that we're claiming, are they really something that we're saying, hey, when it's really convenient and there's no other obstacles to following these things, this is what we ideally like to think. But when we would need to make a trade off about that, either follow this value or do a more profitable thing, we're always going to follow the money. And if that's the truth, then the values on the wall are very conditional. And so
Right.
I think for me, the question becomes, are you going to be ambitious conditional upon your not crossing your values? Or are you going to have values conditional on them not interfering with your ambition? And so I think those are two things people need to really think about.
I would agree 100%. I think those are really interesting. And this is from our philosophy guys. So I think, but here's the really interesting thing, right? It may sound philosophical, it affects your business operations, it affects execution, right? It really is important, right?
Yeah. From my own career, I've been in a company that was scaling. And while it scaled, it didn't become so much more profitable. And people bought into it less and felt less respected because of the way the growth was being achieved. So I've seen it happen where it's just, it doesn't serve the long term. And one of the things I do believe about leadership is that they have to be concerned with a broad spectrum of people and over a long period of time. And it's uniquely the person who's in the leadership seat's role to do that. It's okay for everybody else to say, here's my pains and here's the opportunities in a finite way. But then I think that the person who needs to aggregate those has to then build up a more coherent picture about that and say what works in the long term, what's going to make us durable, profitably, relationally, all those things. Yeah, you can't do this without this eye on the long term. And I think it requires this kind of values commitment. But yeah, it might sound academic, but I've encountered it in practice, both operationally in my current role, but also I was a consultant for 10 years prior to doing what I do now. And what I did in that role is I went company to company, helping them in various ways. But I got to witness this sort of thing because their cultures exist no matter who they are. And I got to see where sometimes the constraints in not just their performance, but the constraints in their ability to almost just flourish as people within an organization was really constrained. It's not just academic, I agree. It's practical and it's very applied. And so I think it's important for people listening to say, how does this affect me on a day-to-day way? And I want to be sure that we are keeping our feet on the ground that way. A question that we might be able to talk about, or you might have a thought about maybe, is how would we really define success as leaders? We're not going to care about culture, or we're going to lose ourselves along the way. What's the success in leadership? I'm not sure where to find that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say one which I was thinking about before is that I think one of the gaps is that what performance looks like and what success looks like from a leadership point of view, like for the org, and the org is really like the people. I think often we make assumptions that if we're clear about the outcomes that we're looking for and how we treat people and all of that, that everybody has a shared understanding of what the behavior looks like in regards to those things. And I would tell you wholeheartedly that is actually not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. And I think this is one of those things that when I hear it, not only do I agree, but I face that challenge a lot. This is not something where I would pretend, like you said in the beginning, I don't pretend to have the answer on all of these things, but it's something that I try to do well, but that I just have this gut feeling like there's still more on the table for me to learn about to do this even better. So we do a lot of things to try to create that clarity. And I have this feeling like this is where sometimes a model or a framework can be useful. If you can build something that people can all look at tangibly together, then we can try to assure that we all might be using the same language, but have different definitions of what we really mean so that we could go our own separate ways with different understanding, but the illusion that we're aligned. And that's dangerous too. So sometimes it's like putting something in front of people that we can all look at together and say, hey, when we talk about what we're going to do next year, what we mean is we're changing this one thing on this model that we're all looking at. And that's helpful, but I still have the feeling it doesn't go all the way. It's one of those things that I still am trying to get better at. I try hard to do it, but like I said, there's room on the table for me to keep going in
Mhm.
that direction. So I think I imagine people listening to this that resonates with them that we're
Right.
trying, but we're not perfect at it.
Here's one thing I'm going to put my coach hat on just for 1 second, which is I think if I was coaching you, what I would say is I love everything that you just said. I think the next step is allowing the teams and the people to actually like churn that up and talk about that and repeat back what is their understanding. The biggest mistake we, I think, have as leaders is we say something, it's perfectly clear, and everybody says yes.
Yeah, I think if I translate what you're saying, let me say it in different words and you tell me if I've understood you or not. Because I think it could be really valuable. Instead of trying to create effective recipients of the message, try to develop other messengers who would be effective at even knowing it so intimately that they could also carry the message the way that you do, understand it as well as you do. No, I think that's a really good point, and I'll try more to incorporate that.
Okay. All right. Listen, we're getting somewhere here. You're CEO of, again, multi-million dollar company. You are, I think, by all external factors, you're successful, right? And you're still a young guy. So, what's one thing that people assume that you've got all figured out and underneath it all, you wrestle with?
I might have hinted at it indirectly here, but I think maybe people would assume, both inside my organization and out of it, that I have this full, complete grasp on what my role even means. Like in
Okay.
leadership, right? In leadership. And I have found that like I said, I haven't been doing this forever, but I've been doing it for 15 plus years. And what I think when I reflect on it is that my personal limitations have also been my leadership limitations. Where I, as a person, am not sympathetic enough, my leadership suffers for that, or not diplomatic enough, or even too overconfident. I've struggled with all of those things at different times, and those flaws have been my leadership flaws as well. I think at the beginning of my role, I really saw the world in this like we talked about it earlier, more it's financial. When
Right.
I went to university, I had a degree in economics. Now I really liked philosophy, so I took a bunch of it, but I always felt, okay, but if I'm going to be in business, I better take this economic stuff because that's going to be the foundation of what I'm going to need. Well, the longer I go, the more I feel like I'm leaning on the philosophy the most because it just feels like it's less about the tools and frameworks and it's more about the interpersonal. So I think you have a background in this sort of thing where maybe you could even comment on what is that experience of trying to help people from an interpersonal perspective to become better in these roles? Because I think my understanding of my role and my ability to do it effectively is developing with me. And It's become more interpersonal as I've gone down that road. The things that I thought leadership was mainly about have become hygiene factors. So, do you need to have a background in some financial literacy? Yeah, but it's a hygiene factor. Do you have to know some frameworks and how to do some strategic things? Yeah, but it's a hygiene factor. Do you know how to engage people, identify talent, and get people pulling in the same direction and believing in something? That's not a hygiene factor. That's a durable longevity thing. Am I right that you encounter this all the time in your work?
I do. Will you define what you mean by hygiene, please?
Sure. Oh, yeah. Hygiene. So, for example, we're a manufacturer, and some manufacturers might say something like, we provide good quality. And I would say that's not really a differentiator. If you don't have that, you can't be in the arena. You don't get to play.
Right.
So I think about leadership. If you don't know a couple of these, if you're not financially literate, you don't have a couple of these skills, you're not willing to at least know those foundations, like you're not really right for the arena in the first place. But
Got it.
those are just, you have to have them. Those don't make you really
Right.
great at it. Those just are things you ought to be checking the boxes of before you even start being differentiated as a strong leader.
Okay. Yeah. I think that where CEOs, in my experience, get themselves in the most trouble is where they are not willing to admit their weaknesses, where they stand up and feel like they have to be perfect. Here's the other place. This is fascinating, right? So there's on that side. The other problem that I get to, I literally had a client very recently, CEO of 100-person firm, who was doing client work because they were afraid of what everybody would think of them if they had the perception of they weren't working hard
Sure.
or they weren't working.
Yep. Yep.
So it comes up in some really interesting ways how people play out what a CEO should or should not be doing.
Yeah. And I think probably there's maybe a textbook definition, but at the same time, you could say that about a lot of things. And then
Right.
you go into most companies, and what they do is their version of. Far be it from me to preach about everybody following one size fits all for leadership, but certainly at some point, you have to have not only the trust to let other people contribute, but also you have to actually proactively give the autonomy, or you'll never create strong people to carry the torch for you. When I was in the consulting world, I saw that a lot, where leadership in companies were at a place where they would have actually really liked to pass things off a little bit, get a little bit more freedom, be less operational. But they really had a hard time giving people the autonomy to not be as good as them initially, to maybe be just as good or better later.
That's right.
And I think it does take a little bit of humility. And we always have to check ourselves frequently to say, am I identifying the people that have the potential to be better than me at certain things, and then giving them the chance to not be
That's
so
right.
good at it to start because I think I see something there. So I think that's really
Right.
important for that type of person that you're describing.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that comes up is, which is, I think, maybe just saying exactly what you said in a different frame, which is, I judge your performance on how I would do things, right?
Sure.
And so I think the other potential side of what you are talking about is, how do we lead to outcomes and let the process be a little bit more fluid? Now, not willy nilly, right?
Mhm.
Just in terms of the people and how people get to it, right? Here's the thing, if you are an accountant and you're doing somebody's tax return, you do not want them loosey goosey with the process, right? If you're manufacturing something and things have to be to spec and to standard and to compliance and so forth, it is what it is, right? But I think often we do things and say things from our own point of view and then don't really think about, how do other people either hear that? How do they need to hear that? How do we communicate to the broader audience or to the person who is sitting across the desk from us if their style is
Yeah.
different than ours?
Yeah, I think we have to a couple of things. If we're focused on outcomes, for example, I think we also have to have the honest talk with ourselves about the fact that we don't always get the outcome we think we want either, because we often are making decisions with imperfect information. And so we're going to make decisions the best we can, and we're going to live with the outcomes. And we hope that everyone who sees the outcome doesn't think that every time we don't get it perfect, that this means we're some kind of underperforming person. We like to think that we all can forgive each other a little bit. So I think we have to give that back. We have to say they're not going to be perfect. And development isn't black and white. There's stages in between where we can give people some freedom, but we're still holding their hand and we're still checking the work in the beginning. We're still giving the freedom incrementally if somebody's really that new. But if somebody has shown they can do it, let's let them do it in some low stakes way and then eventually in some high stakes way. Because I would think that what that leader is doing who doesn't do that, they're protecting something in the short term, which is I want all the short term outcomes to be as strong as the way that I can achieve them. But the weakness they're doing is there's an outcome, which is who's this business after me? And what's it capable of? And so that outcome they're diminishing in favor of this short term thing. So I would say it's a short sighted definition of outcome in the first place. Your job in leadership is also to make sure this business is sustainable in the long term and durable. And so if it's
Right.
all constrained with you, I don't know that you're really achieving that the best way.
It makes me think about the Henry Ford very famous quote, which is wanting to give some training to some of his leadership team and having a VP say to him, "What if they leave? We've
Yeah.
invested in them. What if they leave?" And very quickly turns to him as, "What if they stay?" Right?
Yeah, I don't want to say bad employee, but an employee that you don't nurture and develop that stays never gets any better, like you say. And then you get a company that doesn't evolve. And at least from what I've seen, evolution is necessary because even when we're doing really well, the things that make us succeed right now might not be the exact same things that will make us succeed tomorrow. And so we need to be able to evolve and grow, and we need to help other people do that. So I think, yeah, back to what I was saying about my own sort of take on leadership and how it's changed. One thing that I try to do, and again, it's another area where I think this is more something I'm grappling with is how to be the supporter of a next wave of people who have the skills that may be better than me in a whole bunch of different ways that I back away from some things. And I have done that to some extent, but just identifying opportunities and matches with talent and right positions and things like that. So I really care to give people good opportunities. And you have to be able to say, well, you got an interest over here and I think you'd be capable of it. What's the kind of support that they need? You talked about modeling earlier. If they see that imperfection isn't something that is untolerated,
Right.
then they'll know that they can be imperfect. But if you hide your imperfection from everybody and you act like your way is the perfect way and nobody else's way can measure up, people won't probably take risks and they won't learn
Right.
because they won't ever try anything. And I think that in the long run, you don't take small risks over and over again. One day you're going to have to start taking really big ones because you're going to start being really irrelevant as a company. So it's better to have people that are willing to try little things and pick up the
Right.
learning incrementally and keep the company relevant.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. All right. So I think my next question really, I think is going to fit in perfectly with this, which is if you could rewrite the rule book on leadership,
Okay.
what's one outdated belief that you'd throw away and what would you replace it with?
Okay, so maybe not surprising, but I think any idea that leadership is about effective wielding of authority and implementation of frameworks, I think, like I've said before, I see leadership as a moral discipline more and more. And a lot of the other stuff is you must have them to even be in the arena. But to do it well, it's a moral discipline. We're looking after the health of the organization, the people who depend on it and interact with it. So it's a caretaking role. And I don't necessarily use the traditional term servant leader, but I do talk about principled leadership because I think you have to stay in line with your principles. I think you want to do the things that are good for the company in the long term. And I think you need to know what your non negotiables are because you will face those pressures throughout your role as a leader. Yeah, this shift from authority and framework
Right.
wielding to caretaker, principled role model of the values,
Mhm.
sort of thing. And I think it probably ties in really well to your discipline and interpersonal as well.
And Angelo, I think one of the things that you just brought up is worthy of a little bit more discussion, which is really knowing what your non negotiables are. It's
Yeah.
really interesting. I was just actually doing a coaching session with somebody where they've got a partner, right? And they knew going in that the partner would retire before my client, right? And her retirement seems to be a little bit of a moving target, which on the one hand is actually they have a really good relationship and it's really okay. But I said to her exactly what you just said, which is her tendency is to be quite accommodating. I'm not telling her to not be accommodating, but I am telling her exactly what you just said, which is, what are your non negotiables? Right? Like, where is the line for you? And you actually need to think about that before the line is crossed or before the line keeps moving, right? By somebody else. And I understand we're not talking about the exact same thing in terms of just like a larger organization. But I think that often we don't think about what our non negotiables are until until we're right there at the line.
Yeah, or yeah, exactly. And even though it's not maybe the one for one the same thing, I agree with you that it still applies equally. So I think our non-negotiables are not just an organizational thing; they're a personal thing, and so we're bringing that into the business. And so insofar as we're all people, then it's the same. Yeah, a lot of times what people mean when they say they're getting burnt out or that they've lost themselves to some extent in their careers or in their life path, it means that they've compromised on things that ought to have been non-negotiable, and they've done it consistently enough that they almost feel hypocritical if they recalibrate that with people. So they feel now
Right,
stuck to feign their value system because they've been showing people that these are things are negotiable for them,
right,
letting it erode them over time. And now they're saying, I really don't think that's healthy for me, but I also feel a little bit ashamed to come back and change the rules on everybody when I've been
right,
accommodating that this whole time. So to your point, like you want to identify that before you get past the line where
right.
compromised it already. And now you don't know what to do, but you're not feeling good about it when you go home at night. Yeah. So I think I agree with you about that. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right. What's one unconventional habit or mindset shift that's helped you grow the business?
Okay. Not just to grow my business, although it has helped the business, but the door opener for me across my entire career actually has been that my career is not about me. That I'm an interested party, that's for sure. And it's not about my ego. My ego can benefit sometimes, that's for sure. I'm not trying to vilify that by any means. But I think again, if the goals of your ambitions are just to pat yourself on the back about your ego, you will make a lot of those compromises on your principles. Coming back to what I said earlier, I'll hold my values insofar as they don't interfere with my ambitions. If that's the way you go, you could go really far and you'll feel like an imposter and you'll hurt people along the way. And you might stroke your ego in the short term, but you will maybe not make yourself well or make the people around you well or add wellness or happiness into the world. And so I think that I've tried to reframe that my career is a mechanism to delivering anything that I'm uniquely capable of out into the world that can be of value. And so coming through my whole career, I've been given opportunities mostly because I was willing to be helpful and I was willing to go in the direction that people drew me in to help. I never said I'm going to go be in leadership in a company or I want to be the president of a company. That was never something that I would have called an aim for me. But what I just said was that like I want doors to open for me, but I think what I need to do is just put myself in front of lots of people, see what they need help with. And where people ask me to help them chronically, I'm probably good at that stuff. And I think what has happened as a result is I've only been drawn into opportunities that actually do suit me because I didn't bulldoze my way into those opportunities. They pulled me in towards them. So I don't have to feel like, why am I sitting here? I think that opportunities are definitely fortunate to get. And I'm not trying to say that there's no fortune involved. I wouldn't say that, but I definitely was not presented opportunity outside of what my natural character was suited to. And so the unconventional mindset, I think for me is instead of saying my career is the thing where I do right by myself and I make sure that I can feel good all the time about who I am and how capable I am, how good I am at everything. I think it's about where am I helpful? How can I be positive impact? And how can I find opportunities that kind of align with me where I can do better for myself, but I get to do that and still be me at the end. And I think that's a really nice definition of success.
Yes, I would agree. I think there's a couple of things in there, which is, first of all, it's really important to be curious about yourself, about what you're good at. And I think a lot of people get very caught up in what other people want them to be good at, what your parents wanted you to do, whether it was aligned with your talents and skills or not. And I think just like you said, in order to be in the seat, there are certain things that are just givens, right? You use the word hygiene. I would just say, right, like you can't be in the seat if you can't look at the money, right? You don't have to be the expert in it, but you have to be able to understand what is happening with the money of the business, right? Once you figure that out or have really smart people around you to figure that out, I think that you're exactly right. It's what is the value? What is your highest purpose? The biggest mistake, and I'm going back to something I said earlier, but the biggest mistake I see leaders make is that they don't transition from the doing to the how can I, what is my unique and highest value, and how can I have other people doing
Yeah.
the things that they are good at so then I can do the things that I am uniquely qualified and valuable at, and I can pursue those versus trying to do everything for everyone.
Yeah, I've seen it time and time again. Like I said before, I've seen it many times in my consulting practice in my previous role. And I would also say to the person who's listening who says that's easy to say, try it incrementally, because I think what happens with the free time, if you can delegate some of the expertise, firstly, you'll gain confidence that, hey, maybe somebody else can do it. And that's a lovely thing to realize. But secondly, with that free mental capacity, sometimes you start to have, for me, I found that it was when I wasn't bogged down in all the operational stuff, I then had the capacity to think about how do I create the wellness for everybody, the durability in the relationships, to think on a different level. And so while the person listening right now might say, I've been doing this a long time, I know what I'm going to know. If you free up this layer of mental capacity, I think your brain goes into this new creative mode with that capacity, with all that experience that you have from those operations and all that time you spent around all these people. With this capacity, it starts to do this little colorful dance of, oh, how do I synthesize all of these meaningful things? And you don't know it's going to do that. And then all of a sudden it does. And then you come back to those people with a different kind of support, and then you represent a different kind of
Right.
glue. And I think it can be really beneficial. So if you're listening and you say, hey, that's easy to say, do it in a small way and let's see what happens. Because I bet you
Right.
you'll start having these little epiphanies. They'll be helpful.
That's right. I would agree with you. And you know what? I'm going to up that one more time. It's got to be on your calendar.
Mm,
Okay. So
sure.
you can be busy with stuff all the time. We all can, right? But if you want to do what Angelo's talking about and you want thinking time, right? It's got to be on your calendar. You have to block it off and you have to make it as important as talking to your attorney, as meeting with a prospect, whatever it is. In other words, you can't be like, oh, sure, you want to meet then? Yeah, no, I'm not actually really doing something, right? So I would challenge you, put 1 hour a week on your calendar for thinking time. And
Yeah,
then,
I think that's a good tip to kind of get your ball rolling. And at least then you can prove to yourself that there's value in it. And like you said, I think it's key to not say, I will have that hour free, but now that's available sprint capacity if somebody else needs me for something,
right,
because there is a difference. And in line with thinking about calendars, if there are certain things that you're doing that ought to be delegated, it's not a bad idea to say, by when will I start doing that? Or by when would I like that to be delegated to somebody else in its entirety? Because for me, sometimes that just it gives me clarity about what I want. But then if whoever's the recipient of that timeline, it also gives them some clarity about how fast they need to get up the learning curve themselves. And so it's better for everybody.
I agree. All right, this has been such a good conversation. All right, one last question for you in two
Okay.
parts.
Okay.
Okay. And actually, I'm super curious about the answer to this too, just by the way. So, if, or I'm going to say when, in what circumstance, if you're going to feel imposter syndrome, right? That sort of that contraction of, do I belong in this seat? Right? The little
Mhm.
lack of confidence. What circumstance is that potentially going to come up for you? And second of all, what do you do to get yourself centered again moving forward?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I like the way you worded it, that you said, I think it was in what situations, because I think if you just ask me the blanket question, almost, do you feel imposter syndrome? My gut reaction is to say, not really, not in my operational role, but in what situations I can actually come up with a maybe scenario where there's an exception, right? I'm somebody who really thrives on like kind of the one-on-one thinking, having the deep conversation and doing the hard thinking on things. But part of my role sometimes, and is to kind of network and be a part of the bigger group and to be part of the community of the industry I'm in, let's say. And so I'm not the guy who goes into the room of 100 people to go charm everybody. I'm the guy who finds someone who I know and has a really good conversation about our ideas. I see other people and even other people in my company who've been in roles like mine that are fantastic at that. And I think, wow, what a great thing they can do. So sometimes I guess I feel like if that's an important part of my role, that presence in large kind of industry multi-person settings like that, I probably don't always rise to the occasion on that. And so I would feel like I'm not so good at that. So yeah, I like the way you asked that question. That's a scenario where it happens for me. What do I do? A couple things. Number one, I do sometimes just toss myself into the uncomfortable thing. It feels a lot like, I don't know if you've ever been skydiving, but there's maybe some people have no fear, but anybody I think who's got a sense of their mortality looks over the edge and says, I don't know. But then you jump, right? And once you've jumped, it's happening already. You made the decision. You're not unmaking the decision now. You're in the air. And I feel that way about those things that kind of get me that way, whether it's public speaking or if it's just in those big settings. Those things happen in my life and I'll just jump. And then when it starts happening, I just go, whatever, I'm doing it now. It is what it is. And the more I do it, the more it's better. And I think a second situation is like what we're doing right now, where I bring some of my thinking and expose it publicly. I think there's a vulnerability for me about that because pretty much without fail, while I'm having these types of conversations, I believe in the things I'm saying, but I'm also thinking, what part of what I'm saying am I falling short on in practice where I need to, oh gosh, I'm saying that's important. I really do believe that it's important. I'm not doing the best at it right now. Am I choosing convenience or is it a skill thing or what is it? Sometimes there's a vulnerability I feel even just putting my thoughts out in the open because now I'm accountable. Everybody who knows me can look at this and say he is or he isn't those things. And I'm up to the challenge, but it does feel that little bit of, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, that's something, right? I think nobody's ever actually brought that up before, but I get that. It's really interesting because I did a planning session with my team, and I asked them three questions, right? And it was just the beginning of the planning, right? And I said, let's make a list of all the things that we accomplished this year, right? Like all the things that we've done. Second of all, I want you to make a list of the things that you've accomplished. And third, I want your ideas around where we go next year. And they just blew me away. Like I was shocked. And when I kept just, I'm going to use a Yiddish word, felling about them, and I just couldn't believe how just clear they were and on target they were and about aligning with where I'm going. And they said a really interesting thing. Like, they're like, Kim, you're so clear about the vision and about what we're doing that it's really easy to figure out what the roadmap looks like. And I'm not saying that honestly at all to toot my own horn. I'm saying I was surprised to hear it. Like, you don't know really all the time. You know what you want to communicate, but you don't know how it's received. And I
Yeah.
think what was satisfying for me and interesting is that I felt like, oh, I'm walking the walk, right?
Yeah.
I'm a
Sure.
coach and a consultant. So I am constantly telling people what to do and
Hmm.
how to
Hmm.
lead better and how to do it. And I was like, it feels very good that it's not just speak,
Yeah.
right? That you are executing. And I think the other thing that I learned from that was to really invite feedback on a very regular basis, right?
Yeah, it sounds like there was a couple of things there that, again, you said you're not doing it to pat yourself on the back, but it is a good case study to just say, number one, how important the constant communication is. And then secondly, how important it is to even just ask. If maybe there were some things that came out in what people had to say that were in line with the vision you have, but maybe were like net new ideas about how to go down that path. And well, they had the idea before you asked them the question, but it came out when you asked them the question. So So
Right.
then that's how important it is to ask the questions and not just assume that people are going to come out with it every time they have some idea. They might say,
Right.
it just happens in passing and it's not like malicious. It's just this thing where, you know, not every idea I have, I'm going to say out loud. But if somebody asks you and you give it to them, maybe you're really onto something. Part of the lesson there, I think, is make sure you ask. And that's another one of those things that I'll try to take away and do a little bit even more of than I do now.
And I think the last thing that I would say to this sort of idea is that it's constantly getting the feedback, but you said they did come up with some new ideas. And I was like, great. You want to execute on that. I think that is an excellent idea, right?
Yeah,
But
sure.
I think giving people, again, latitude with leadership, right? I think that's the
Yeah.
thing is that it's such a dance, right?
That's where mastery is going to come from. And if you don't give them the chance, then it'll never happen. And that's not good for you or them. I'm with you. I think it sounds
Yeah.
like the right thing, and I believe in it. I wondered a question for you. You're talking to a lot of people in this podcast, but also in your career, your formal career. What do you find people are misunderstanding about leadership generally? Is there anything that kind of sticks out as a regular that a lot of people think it has more to do with this than it does, or anything like that?
These days, it's interesting that you asked that question because I've actually been thinking about this recently. And for me, I think that one of the things that I see is that leaders think that they have to drive things by sheer force of will.
Right. So what I had said about the whole let's shed the idea that it's about wielding authority and more about it's a moral discipline.
Yeah, I think so. It's that. And what's so interesting about it is that it's not just that, it's also people, what would I say? They misassign their own, I don't want to say importance, but their own. I have to do all these things because the responsibility is all mine. And at the end of the day, the buck stops with me. And so I am just going to push this entire thing forward. And I think that that is a mistake because that gets you into the operational and tactical pieces of your business, which frankly, I'm just going to say you have no business being in,
Yeah. Yeah, I
right?
think especially after you get to a certain point, right? Obviously, if you're a solopreneur, you've got no choice. But yeah, you get to a point where you have to start thinking about what does it mean to be a leader? Because we can't just be a practitioner about
That's right.
operational practitioner. Otherwise, we are shirking that responsibility of leadership. And it's
Right.
again, I don't think it's on purpose, but I think we have comforts. So
That's
sometimes
right.
people are in leadership roles because they're a workhorse or because they have some experience that does work, that they are right about something operational and led to them finding a market niche or getting promoted or whatever opportunity led them to be where they are. And I think when they hear somebody like you or I say, you got to get out of that operational, they think what you're saying is that's not the reason that they're successful. And I would say, no, it might be the reason you got to this point. It just doesn't mean that's also the thing you need now.
That's right.
But it's not a criticism that's not true that you needed it to get
Right.
here. Maybe you did need to do that, and some people had to. So it's not to discount that energy, effort, and time. It's just to say we got to be aware that there's a transition that actually could take you to the next level and that everybody else
That's right.
involved could benefit from. I'm with you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know how I like to say it is that you got to give yourself actually a different job description. And
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah. I think that's about,
hard
yeah.
thing to do, right?
Mm,
Especially when you're in it. And I think there's a lot of, I've been successful doing it this way. So
yeah.
now that I'm a CEO, I'm just going to do more of what I've been doing because it's what's made me successful. And I would say exactly what you just say. In order to get to the next level, you've got to do some different things,
So
right? You can't.
I was involved in athletics for some time when I was a little younger, and I was on a competitive team in running track actually. And I had a really interesting experience that stuck with me was when I first went to be on a competitive team. The day I showed up to that team, we ran drills and they were mock performance drills. So you got to see kind of like where you stacked up on the team in terms of your overall performance as though you were in competition. And on my first day, I had the highest level of performance compared to everybody on the team who was already being competitive. And my new coach, first day, came over to me and he said, "You're fast, but you're doing a bunch of things mechanically wrong. What I need you to trust is that I'm going to tell you what you need to be doing. You're going to become slower, but you have to be willing to do that if you're going to become better than you are now. But you will if you just trust me." And I think that the higher your current level of performance is, the more it feels scary to abandon it in favor of potential future performance. So I think what we're asking people is to be willing to say, okay, I'm operating at a very high level, and making a change doesn't mean you will immediately outdo that performance. You might find that you take a step down, but that fast forward, now you're 3 steps ahead because you were willing to make that change. So be willing to make that change.
Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Angelo. That is the perfect sentiment, I think, to end this podcast with. So thank you so much. This has just been such an interesting and engaging conversation. And again, so thoughtful. So I just really appreciate it. Again, my guest, Angelo D'Amico. And I am Kim Miller-Hershon, Kim Miller-Hershon Coaching and Consulting. What I would love you to do is one of two things. Subscribe to my newsletter. People say that it's helpful. And the second thing is we will have a webinar, a free webinar coming up. So check that out too. And share this with a friend. Angelo just had so many interesting, good things to say today. So anyways, thank you for listening. Unconventional wisdom about conventional wisdom. We'll see you next time.
Where cliches come to retire. Drop that beat, turn down to fire. Say what's real, make fears take a seat. Unconventional wisdom, dancing on your feet.